Hello and welcome back to the channel, and my apologies firstly for the slight delay in getting this video out. I've had a very busy couple of weeks, and I've also been working on one major project as well in the background, and some other bits and pieces which I'll share more news about in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, if not sooner. So without further ado, this video is all about those lovely rocks that I created in the previous video, which you can see here on my channel. So here's the video that I made previously. And this is the one that's called How I Made Stylized Rocks in Blender. I'll put a link in the description if you want to watch that. So if you're curious to see what the material looks like for this is the video for that. So here I have the rocks that I made previously. And I've also got this weird icosphere thing here and a cylinder slightly tweaked. And the reason I've done that is because these two objects here are using the procedural version, the original version of the shader that I created. And these ones here, I decided to finally bake the shaders onto the object. So each of these has its own, I think it's 2K texture map. So if you're getting quite close, you should be able to start seeing pixels, as you can see. Sometimes you get a few glitches here and there, but it was good enough for the purpose of this project. So yeah, for today's video, I'm going to show you how I made the material in the first place. So here we are over in the shading workspace, and it's left over from my previous workflow, I guess. So on the left hand side, you can see I've got some of this UV from the rocks here, or one of these rocks anyway, not sure which one. And here, if I select one of these objects here, you can see they both share the same material, which is the original rock material that I will show you and talk you through today. So what I'm going to do is not recreate this node by node. As you can see, it is ever so slightly complex, but as you can see from these containers that I've added, once you break it down into the sum of its parts, it does kind of make sense, and it's not as complex as you might think. It's just working through part by part and layering them up with a couple of mix shaders there. You can see I've added a couple of annotations. So this one here at the top, this mix shader here, is mixing the rocks and the moss. And if I just put this into rendered mode, you will notice here at the bottom, you always have this moss coming up from the ground level. Okay, so this one here mixes the moss and the rocks. And this one is purely the rocks material, which is a combination of these ones here. Okay, and we have the factor, of course, the mix factor, which is this one here, the rocks and the masks. And the edge wear, as you can see on the edges here. This is not the best example of the cylinder, but this gives you a better indication of that. So anyway, with that said, let me collapse these windows and I will show you how this works. So let me make this full screen by pressing Control Spacebar. And let's first take a look at the base. I'll call it darker rock. If I just come out of that actually, and we'll isolate this object in the viewport by pressing !/. There we go. So if I'm now using Node Wrangler for this to work actually, so Control Shift and click the principled BSDF, you can see this is the material that we have here. Okay, so this is actually using some image maps that I grabbed, I believe, from Ambient CG. I'll put the links in the description for that. You can see there it's called Rock 01. So I'm using the roughness map, the diffuse map, the normal. In fact, just those three: diffuse, roughness, and normal. And of course, being version 4 of Blender, here's the new principled BSDF. As you can see, I've got those plugged into the correct slots. So this is pretty straightforward stuff here. So we've just got the texture coordinates and mapping coordinates. The key thing to take away here is that I'm using object as the coordinates. And there's a reason for that because, as I said, I wanted this to be a procedural material, but it does rely on these images. Having said that, you don't need to use these images, okay? You can recreate this texture by Control Shift and click that. This is the texture from the rock material, the image, I should say. So you can probably create this with a noise texture or some other combination of materials shaders or nodes in Blender that are procedural. You don't have to use an image. But I chose to do it this way just to keep the numbers of the nodes down. And what I've done with this image is I've run it through a hue saturation value node. So if I click that, you can see the value there is not 1, but 0.7. That just makes it a little bit darker, hence the name of that group. I've also desaturated it ever so slightly to 0.85. And I may have changed the hue from 0.5 to 0.53. So a very small adjustment in that regard there. So if I click back on this one now, that's the final result with the roughness map, which is this one. Barely see that. I didn't really change this one. I left it as downloaded. And of course, the normal map is pretty straightforward as well. But you can do the same with the bump node using procedural materials. So this is fairly straightforward. Nothing too difficult there. Okay, so beneath that, I'll put this into one group, by the way. Into one. Whoops. I've broken my nodes. There we go. Let's undo that. So beneath that, I've added another group, which is lighter rock. And this is exactly the same. Tell a lie, it's not the same images. It's aerial grass rock. Okay, I'll see if I can find the link for that and put it in the description as well. And also the main takeaway from this is I'm also using the object as the texture coordinates. And one very important thing I forgot to mention up here, when you add an image, and I'll just do that here, if I add a texture and image node, you'll notice that by default you get this flat selection and repeat and so on. Now let's remove that. And you'll notice here I changed it from flat to box. Okay, and the blend value is a 0 at default, and the blend value simply blends between the different sides of the shader. Sorry, I just knocked my microphone out. That didn't pick up. So yeah, the blend value is really important because you don't want to have these harsh seams from the image. So I'll turn that all the way to 1. And if you do that on one of these material nodes, you have to do the same for all of them. Otherwise, you will have seams on the roughness and the normal, or those that you don't do, change over to box and blend. So make sure you do that. And also don't forget to select non-color for the roughness and the normal node as well. So just to recap, object, texture coordinates, and I'm using box projection for all of the image maps there. And the same for the lighter rock. So let's have a look at what this material is. If I shift click that, you can see that it is a lot more, I guess, vibrant visually. So it's a lot more saturated. There's a little bit of green in there as well, touch of green, speckles of white. I'm guessing they're kind of stone substances there as well. Different shades of different chemicals of what's the word I'm saying? Different stone types or chemistry. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Anyway, you get the idea. And again, I ran that through a hue saturation value node, and I've actually increased the value here. So here's the before, and here's the after. And that just goes through again into the base color of our principal BSDF. Okay, so I've got these two material groups, if you like, node setups, and I plugged them into a mixed shader node. So now we have this. Obviously, the factor is a factor in this case, no pun intended. So ignore that. But the factor is blending those two in. So this is what's giving this highlighted edge. So let's turn our attention to the Pointiness mix mask / edgeware. Trademark pending for sure. So this is effectively acting as a mask here. Okay. So what's in here? Let's have a look. And don't worry, I will show you all of these nodes at the end of the video, block by block, so you can just take a screenshot or duplicate it from there if you like. So back to this, let's start from the left-hand side. That's where we tend to start over here. And I started off with a noise texture. As you can see, there it is. And I know that we have some new values or sliders in version 4 Blender. So I created this in version 3.64 and 3.65. So hopefully everything's transferred over nicely into version 4, which I think it has. So anyway, looking at the noise texture, nothing too difficult there. Normalize is nice to have now. That's good. Again, texture coordinates is object. Mapping is the default values there. And the important part here, really, the big player is the geometry node here. And this one is where you can find the pointiness attribute for your object. So this is looking for the peaks and the troughs, the highs and the lows in your geometry and selecting those. Now, at first glance, if I do that, just cycle click, Control Shift and click until I get to pointiness like that. And I just expand this out. You can see that there is something there, but it is quite hard to make out. Okay, and that would depend on the angle, I guess, of the highest point and the lowest point within the geometry. So this is quite subtle, so it's not going to be fairly distinctive, the pointiness value. So it's quite soft basically. And so what I've done is I ran that through a ColorRamp node. As you can see here, this obviously clamps the values, the darks and the whites quite nicely. So I did that first without the linear light node here, the mixed color node. If I disable that, this is what you'd have when you have these two and you plug this into that. Okay. Well, you can't add this into one slot, but you get the idea. I would have originally had this plugged into here, for example. So I did this and then mixed these two together with a mixed color node. And what I've done there is press the M key to mute or disable this node. If I press M again, that will enable that node. You can see the difference. If I toggle that, I'm using the noise texture as a way to mix the values that I'm getting from the pointiness attribute there. So if I enable that, I'm mixing the pointiness with the noise texture with a very small factor, in fact. So if this was 0.5, as it normally would be, we get a lot of distortion, as you can see there, which is pretty cool, but that's not what I was after. So the lower you bring this, the less influence the noise texture will have on the pointiness node above it. So I went quite low, didn't I, to 0.16, I think it was, 0.016. So let's do that, 0.016, something like that. And I've already mentioned this one here. So I also ran it through another ColorRamp node. And I think this may be not as necessary now in version 4 of Blender, simply because there's been a slight revamp in some of the nodes and also the way that some of these values internally of these nodes are, I guess, split between 0 to 1 effectively. So effectively they've been normalized, as you can see here with this normalized, and some of these have been normalized more so. So that the reason I used that is because I wanted to, have more control over the mix of the black and white. But that may not be necessary in version 4. You may need to just leave that off. You still get a decent result. So maybe I just wanted to make the effect stronger. That's probably too strong now, actually. So it may be that in version 4, this shouldn't be so strong. I don't actually need that. So yeah, there is that to bear in mind. So with that said, I also tried to make this effect, pointiness effect, stronger. I also added a map range node. Now, I'm not the best at understanding exactly how this works perfectly, so I did my best to play around with these values and see what worked and what didn't for me. And you can see there the default values will be 1 here and 1 here. And I simply increase those in the end to 3 and 3. And if I show you what those are there, you can see from and min and max and to min max. So yeah, that's what I did. And again, this is not quite high. I remember it looking in 3.6. So maybe I need to tweak this a little bit. Feel free to do that yourself. So in a nutshell, this is our mask that I've plugged into the mix shader for these two rock textures, which are based off images. Okay. Right. So with that, I then wanted to, let's bring that into play. So if I show you the effect of that, this is what you get. That's not exactly how I imagined it. So just ignore that for a moment. It shouldn't be so hard on the edges there. Let's see if we can just quickly tweak that, he says infamously. That's fine. Maybe just remove this one. So if I do that and then just hold down the Alt key and drag this out, that should leave the connection in place. And that's looking a lot better. Let's see how that looks now. Yeah, that's kind of more what I had initially. Maybe not as subtle, but that's pretty close. Maybe it needs a slight tweak, so the whites can be perhaps a little bit stronger, like that. And I've got it set to ease here as well, soften the transition. Perhaps bring that back a little bit. Like I say, feel free to play around with that. So you can see why you need these kind of to help with the, if I bring that down, oops, I need to click on it first. You can see the effect that's having. Maybe stronger actually. Could be 4. I'll leave it at 3 for now anyway, you get the idea. So we'll leave this one off. In fact, I'll put it back. What the heck? It was there before, so that looks terrible. Let's pull that back a little bit. There we go, let's do that. Because it has been normalized now, isn't it? So yeah, let's go with that. Cool. There we go. Okay, so we've got these two, as we said, let's recap. Using that as a mix, a mask. And then I also wanted, at the base of the material, I wanted a mossy kind of green look to it. And the reason for that is because I kind of imagined that if the rocks are, you know, embedded in the soil or some earth or some ground type, that would obviously have more dampness to it around it. So it's possible that moss will then creep up the stone surface. So I wanted to have that effect as well. And yeah, you could obviously do this with texture painting as well. Probably be a lot easier, but it won't be procedural, of course. So let's have a quick look at the mossy material, which is a little bit complicated actually, more than I anticipated. But ultimately, it's very similar to the others. It's just a different combination of similar nodes, effectively. You can see at the bottom, for example, we've got texture coords, mapping, noise texture again, color ramp, and a bump node. So there's effectively, this is all of our bump information, which you can see here. Doesn't look fantastic, but I think that's pretty good for what it's doing, especially when you get a little bit further away from it. So that's the normal, okay? Like obviously goes into our principled BSDF, into the normal slot there. Right, so I've also added another level of noise bumpiness, if you like. So I've got one bump node here using these nodes. I have another bump node, which is plugged into the other one. And this one is using a color ramp, noise texture, and some texture coordinates, of course. And just to repeat again, these are all object coordinates mapping, not UV or generated. So I've got two noise textures here. In fact, sorry, I've got these shared between these two. So I've got another noise texture here. And this is where we get the color as well, the diffuse or the base color, I should say. We've got the noise texture, as I said, and this plugs into a converter color ramp. So you can see there I've added 3 green markers, and feel free to use whatever colors you feel. I'll just show you what these colors are in case you wanted to use the same hex values. So on this one, we've got 2E3614 on the left. In the middle, I have 4C5A37. On the far right, it's slightly more yellowy, puke green, dare I say. The hex value for that is 92884D. So I've got these there in that position. That's plugged into the base color. All right. So again, using the same noise texture, the output from that is also plugged into a color ramp. And it's a very, very subtle difference here, but that's plugged into the roughness. Let's just see what's happening here. So here's our noise texture. Here's our color ramp. And I'm wondering whether this has actually changed now that I put it into Blender version 4 from 3.6, but I don't think it has. I'll just undo that. We select this one here and see what the value is. It's E1, E1, E1. So in terms of value, YGB, that's actually quite, it's not pure white at all. So it's difficult to spot it in here. This one, yes, that's that one there. This one here It can't be the same, right? No, sorry, my bad. The one on the left is bright, is almost a white. And the one here, just past the middle, is the E1, E1, E1. And the left one is F6, F6, F6. So very small difference there. And this is the result of that shader. So the fact that these are very, what's the word, biased towards white, that means that this is almost a matte finish, but not quite. So there is some smoothness to this material. So quick recap, we've got a bump set up here. We have another bump node, which is fed through a noise texture again here. And using the same coordinates, another noise texture that is fed into a color ramp with the colors. That's the colors you see mixed here. So if I click that, you can see we have this green, yellowy, and dark patches. You can make these as large as you like. So if you want more dark patches, obviously you push these further to the right and reduce the yellow. Or you may want to create something completely wacky like that. Whatever you like. I'll just undo that. There we go. Cool, so that's the moss part, the mossy element. Let's click on this mix shader now, which is the rocks and the moss. So, of course, this one is taking the output from our first mix shader into the second one on the bottom slot. In the top slot, we have the moss material nodes plugged into the second slot there. And the mask for this one is a linear gradient mask. And there's a very simple reason for that. I kind of touched on it earlier. We want this to be from the base of the object going vertically up the tip. And of course, we don't want to go all the way to the top unless that's what you want. So this is controlled over here and over here. So let's just have a quick look at what this is actually doing, how I've got around to this. Now, straight away, you can see I've got the same setup as I have in other places. Texture coordinates, using object, mapping, of course. And here I've got some rotation actually, a rotation value of 212 degrees on the x-axis. We'll have a look at that in a second, see what that's doing. Here's our noise texture. If I shift click that, this is what our noise texture is doing. And here are the values for that if you want to do the same. Now I've fed that through a color ramp to crush the blacks and make this a lot more contrasty. And that's the result of that. Is there a bit of distortion? No, there isn't. It would be nice to have had these before because I'm not sure how that would behave now if I change these values. Could get some cool effects. Anyway, that's all going back here. So let's click on. So we're up to here. We've got this. At the top here, we've got another texture coordinate and mapping node. And that feeds into a gradient texture, which is set to linear. All right. So in other words, a straight line. And we have this node here, which is a mixed color node set to subtract. And my apologies, I should have actually mentioned earlier on the mixed node for this one here, the Pointiness mixed mask edgeware thing, I set to linear light. Okay, so the mixed color node, the color node set to linear light. Let's go back to our gradient mask. You can also see here, and under the mapping node, we have a rotation of 90 degrees on the y-axis. So if I go click here, shift click that, you can see it's dark at the bottom and light at the top. Now if I turn this back to 0, which is the default of course, you can see it's on the left hand side or the right depending on which way you're. Yeah, it's on the left for me through the front view. So obviously that's in the wrong place, so I just simply rotated that 90 degrees on the Y and that pushed it to the bottom. And the other key difference between this node and the other ones, like this one and the others further down, is I'm using generated, not object. Because object will do that, which you can do. You'd have to play around with some color ramps and probably map ranges again to get this to spread out nicely. If we do that, that looks pretty cool. But you can see it's far too high, so you can't bring that any lower with this. So I think a map range may help there. I'm not 100%. Feel free to play with that and add it yourself if you think that's going to be really cool. You understand this stuff better than I do. So yeah, anyway, I rotated it 90 degrees. And that's plugged into a mixed color ramp. So I have this bunch and this bunch here, and a factor of almost 0.5, 0.426, very specific number. Don't know what it means, but that's what I went with. And that tended to look pretty good. So we have this. So the point again of this mix is all of these nodes here, the noise texture in particular, is introducing some chaos to the very clean linear transition from bottom to top. Okay, this is effectively a mix of the two, and this is the result. So I pushed the contrast a little bit more with the ColorRamp node, and that's as far as that went. So that was enough, and that is the factor for our second mix shader node. And of course, that's plugged into the material output. You can see this is what we get. So let's go back to layout. So there's the material as we just saw, and here's the same one on the cylinder. And what I like about this material is the fact that it is obviously procedural, minus the images, of course. You can recreate those as procedural if you want. I think time was a bit of a factor for me, so I didn't. What I like about this is obviously being procedural, you can edit your objects. So if I select this face here, and I press I to insert that, and then E to extrude. Let's select this edge loop there with Alt click. And I'm going to press Control B and give it a soft curve there. So you can immediately see the procedural material obviously adapts to your model as you're modeling or as you create whatever you like. And that's how I ended up getting this look. So there's the moss, you can see at the base of the rocks. Of course, this is using the images now. I baked the images in, hence why you notice in my outliner, I have rock 1 baked, rock 2 baked, rock 3, and so on. So I put in the cylinder and the icosphere just so I can keep the procedural material separately. So yeah, I think it's quite versatile material. It can be used for anything, maybe metal as well. I haven't tried that, and maybe other uses as well. So if you want to recreate that, feel free. Alternatively, head over to my Gumroad page, which again, I apologize for not updating that as often as I'd like. I will add the material there. So if you want to support the channel, and that's a great way of doing that, because at the moment, and probably for a while yet, I don't make a cent off YouTube. So everything that you see here is done for free, effectively. But I enjoy what I do, so that's why I do it. And I hope you guys find it useful. So anyway, if you want to support me in the channel, head over to Gumroad, and you can choose to buy this material if you want to, or you can recreate it as I've shown you here today. So without further ado, let me switch back to the shading workspace, and I'm going to maximize this window. I'll just show you each block one at a time and leave it there for a couple of seconds. You can pause the screen and recreate it if you so desire. So let's start off with the rock textures. Zoom in a bit more in case that's difficult to see. Okay, let's go back. Let's have a look at the lighter rock material. Okay, let's have a look at our mossy material. And I may just pan this in 2 sections. So the top part first, something like that. And the lower part. And all together, if you can see that on YouTube, I have no idea if that comes through. There it is all together. Okay, so let's have a look at our first mix mask or edgeware group. Okay, and let's have a look at finally the linear gradient mask that we just talked about. Cool, let's get out of full screen mode, go back to layout. That's pretty much it for this video, guys. So all I can say is thank you for joining me. I hope that was useful and you learned something. And yeah, recreate that material. As I said, support me on Gumroad if that's what you choose to do. That'd be really appreciated. And of course, like and subscribe as always, as they say. And I'll see you very soon. Did I say you soon? I'll see you very soon. For now, take care. Bye-bye.